What I love about sociology is that as an academic discipline, you can study absolutely anything that has to do with people. I was just interviewed by a journalist from a brewery magazine who was interested in answering the question of why women don't go to the bars alone more often, after her own personal experience of going to a bar alone and some men in the brewery commenting that it was refreshing to see a woman alone in the bar because often that doesn't happen. And so she came to me as a sociologist who has a master's in women's studies and has studied gender relations to ask this question, why don't women go to the bars alone? I reflected on my personal experience of being a lone bar girl in my early 20s in New York City, and I was excited to have the conversation with her where we could talk about anecdotal experiences of women in the bars or women's fears of going to the bars alone, as well as the sociological literature that can help us understand this phenomenon. The reporter came to my office and we had a great time talking for an hour about our own personal experiences and any kind of sociological insights into women's place in the world and in the bar, women's place in society. So I was able to provide some macro sociological perspectives, talking of course about patriarchal culture and the dawn of time, how men have been empowered in society, and society has really been constructed in order to maintain this power in society. And so that means men control the policies, the legislatures, but also the professions, the built environment, the cities, the family structure, and basically in short that society is built for men. And so I mentioned to her, think about the saloon of the 1800s in the Wild West of the United States. Who is inside that, and what does that saloon look like, and who is the customer? And of course, the saloon of the Wild West is oriented towards these male workers, and then they come to the saloon, which is a male-dominated space, and the only position for women within this space is as the barmaid or as the sex worker, as the prostitute. Incidentally, there is a history of women in saloons, women in the Wild West, that talk about the role of women in the historical saloon. And then our conversation meandered to just the field of urban sociology. And so thinking about the city as a public space that is designed for male citizens. Public spaces historically have been places for men, and women would need a male escort in order to be out in public spaces. And that continues to this day in some countries where women are really required to be with a male escort, or at least the symbolic companionship of one in one's wedding ring, and therefore that leads to women wearing fake wedding rings to be left alone in these public spaces. I was telling her about thinking about how the social behavior is regulated within particular institutions such as the hospital, the workplace, the church. There's expected norms of behaviors in all of these spaces, and that's true also for the public space and for the bar. The bar culture is therefore oriented around this male customer, and women's position within that is just as this sexual object lure to get more male customers into the space. There is a series of books on the history of women in alcohol, and some of this history does get into women who are involved in the alcohol culture, including as workers in the bars, but also as brewers in their own right and as customers. And so more contemporarily, you have women gaining a lot of rights in society, and so that also includes the right to have their own professions, to make their own money, to live life as they want, and to pursue their own leisure. And so now we've come to a place where we have lots of women brewers, and so we would assume that a women-owned brewery would be a great space for women to feel comfortable, and that women now are empowered and customers in their own right. And so I was thinking that for me, as the takeaway of this conversation with the reporter, I would hope that breweries would take this perspective of their women's customer into consideration, and of course have a no harassment policy. If you see your women customers being harassed, you don't want that kind of behavior within your space, but also thinking about just the design of the space and how it could be more appealing or comfortable for women. And I was just fantasizing about this perfect little window nook with one comfy seat and not a second seat for a man to pull up alongside that woman who's seeking just a peaceful moment in her own time to gaze out the window and not be subjected to unwanted male attention. Of course, we talked about how women have lots of fears that may or may not be justified. Of course, the violence that women do experience in their own lives are from people in their lives that are loved and trusted, their partners, someone that they are in a relationship with, and not strangers, as women are taught to fear strangers. Women are just told these narratives that a woman alone in a restaurant or a bar is someone to be pitied, but rather we can change that narrative to really include the lone woman as customer in the marketing materials and in the design of the space. But as we did learn from the journalist's original example, that women alone are in the minority of customers. And so I would ask you in the audience, why do you think this is so? Does this continue? And how can spaces become more friendly environments for women, be they alone, be they with friends, be they with their children? And do you know other books on this topic of women and the history of alcohol? So just another realm in which our sociological theory and sociological perspective can provide, if not some insights, at least some sociologically interesting questions for us to consider.